right now. What's up, sons? It's Blind Rod with Tech once again, and today I have Andrew Weir joining me. He has about 5 years of development experience, and specifically we're going to be taking a look at Unreal Engine 4 and some of the tools that are going to basically be replaced by the new ray tracing technologies and maybe even DLSS. I'm not sure. It's going to be a little bit off the cuff, and I'm a little under the weather, so excuse me if I cough, but welcome. And Andrew, you still there? Hello? Oh, we lost Andrew already, it looks like. Let me check with him. It's going to be one of those days, boys. But we'll get started in just a sec. I'm checking with him. So basically what we want to do here is get a little bit of an idea of what tools are going to be used and what kind of changes that's going to make to the entire industry from a developer's perspective. You can check his YouTube out in the description below, as well as check him out on Twitter at Andrew Weir Art. And I'm just working on trying to get audio from him right now, so we'll get that working up. He's getting some coffee probably. It's a little late for him, but we'll see. He says he can't hear me, so let me see if I can fix that for him. Can you hear me now? Might just have to throw you might just have to throw you on a different audio output. You should be able to hear me. I see my screen bumping. Technical difficulties. Awesome. I heard him talking earlier too, so I don't know what's going on with that. Let me check audio out here real quick. We'll go to let's go to game. I can yeah, our audio is working, and I can see me bumping over here, so we're just waiting. You can hear him? Why can't I hear him? It's weird. It's going to be one of those days. Starting out great. Well, thanks for being here, guys. We'll get this figured out shortly. You like it loud? I have it turned up a little bit for you, so I just can't hear him at all, so that's interesting. Well, let me do this then. Hey.
Oh, hello.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect.
Cool. I had you up on my phone so I could see.
Okie dokie. So we finally did it. I guess Chrome took a poop, so I moved back to Firefox, and you're up and running. So I apologize for that. I don't know what happened. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and I guess introduce yourself, and we'll go from there. I kind of introduced you already, but we'll
yeah, I could hear that as well. So I've been doing 3D art for like 5 years now. Obviously 5 years ago when I started, obviously the work I was doing wasn't that good. but it was good enough to get me into university. And I've studied at university a master's degree, 4 years in the UK here. So,
Okay. And that's in like 3D art and design, or
the
specifically?
name of the course is games design,
Okay.
but it's an art course, not a design course as much.
Okay. Gotcha.
Um, and that's been obviously a good jumping off point for me to actually get into the industry. Obviously, I've not used any of this new software or anything to do with the RTX. Obviously, if I had, I wouldn't be able to talk about it. But I'm only in a small company in the UK,
Okay.
and some of the stuff that they showed in the presentation is obviously geared towards people that, or they were trying to give everyone that understanding of what RTX is, what the ray tracing is, and how that changes modern software and modern games, obviously.
Yeah, because the premise or the idea is that it changes the way all of that processing works. So we have a different benchmark to run off of now, essentially, than what we have in the past. Do I understand that part correctly?
Yeah, so it wasn't too deceiving if you do understand how things are rendered and how things, and what the difference is. It's just that it's so good at being faked. As you can see on my screen, the reflections probably look pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
The lighting probably looks pretty good. But I'm going to go through how that's currently faked, because obviously they didn't have time to explain a lot of that stuff.
Okay, so go for it, and I'll let you know if there's any questions going on. They asked, so you make models in 3D?
Yeah, so I use 3D software. You can see my software at the bottom. I generally use Blender, but the industry standard is 3ds Max and Maya.
Okay.
And then there's some other texturing software here, basically just using software, you've got to take it through multiple software, and then you finally get into the game engine, and that's where all of it comes together, and you've got, the games that you guys see.
So how is it being faked right now? So you have the point light, or what are these up here on the screen right now?
So there's different types of lights that they went through in the presentation. Especially in the Tomb Raider demo, there was point lights and there was spotlights, which are currently things that we use at the moment. The thing is, with this scene at the moment, it probably looks pretty nice. You're getting some different values that you'd expect. So the light's sort of fading off as it goes. I'd say it's still probably pretty sharp, but at the moment, this is baked into the actual mesh, so it's basically just a texture that is ray traced and saved from the point light. So this point light, as I look in the details panel here, is stationary, which means that it's using a mix of real-time lighting and static lighting, which means that it can't be moved. Obviously, in the Tomb Raider demo, they showed lights that were moving.
Right.
So the Tomb Raider demo showed moving, like children holding little flares, and in the non-RTX, they didn't have shadows because the ray trace shadows are a little bit more expensive.
But you can fake that if you wanted to, or can you not
so we
fake
have
that
faked
at all?
It.
Okay.
You can fake it. So I've just changed that to movable now, and it's still going to use the baked information because it has been baked while it's stationary. But so you can get movable lights and movable shadows, but the problem is that it's not a soft shadow. In real life, especially if you've got a source this close.
Gotcha.
And obviously, this in general in real life, light doesn't emit from a single point. So this is literally, a tiny, tiny point that's firing out rays. And real lights in general, say a light bulb, especially a light bulb with a cover, a lampshade, that would diffuse the light a lot differently to what we can actually fake in games. So I'm going to go through some of these. As I say, the effects for some of the stationary lights, again, stationary being a mix between lights that can't move but also using some dynamic stuff so that I can move objects and they will get shadows. But as you can see there, the baked information still exists, so that's not possible.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then
Pat May's asking, isn't it a bit of hype when NVIDIA are touting ray tracing, but they are doing this on very limited elements like the eyes and some limited fire effects?
I think that's just a lot of show, obviously, because there's kind of a spectacle to zooming into someone's eyes and being able to see an entire scene in front of them. Obviously, artists might want that freedom. I could imagine in a cutscene, being able to zoom in on someone's eyes for really an emotional moment in the scene, or just for any artistic reason that you might want to do that. It makes it a lot easier.
Okay, so basically the technology is going to make it easier for developers to implement like ray tracing effects without having to basically manipulate it or kind of trick your eyes into seeing it.
Yeah, so the quality, I'd say the quality of work when this sort of technology is available to more people, obviously you have opportunities and even game types which people have thought of, maybe like being able to see people around corners and all that kind of stuff. You could have stuff that obviously we can't do today that can affect games in that sort of way, but it's not really about gameplay. Not about gameplay. I'd say this update is more of a as far as the graphics card go. I can't imagine it performing less than a 1080 Ti as normal, but when ray tracing is on, obviously it probably will. But only because you're adding more graphical content. I'd say it is being compared.
Would you say this is more of an early adoption for developers to start getting used to the technology than it is for maybe the average gamer to purchase at this point?
I'd say it's definitely not. Obviously, they've already got the high-end quadros,
right?
Developer cards, which are good. I'd say the 2080 Ti is breaching into the area of, for me as a small dev, I'd probably choose to go with that because I'm interested in that sort of stuff, and it does offer some speed enhancements to what I do. Like, for instance, when these lights are baked, that can take, in a more advanced scene, that can take a lot of time out of it. So basically, if I want this light to be, maybe I think that this is like too harsh, right? I wouldn't know that until I bake the scene. That could take 10 minutes out of my schedule, of my workday, just to bake the scene, to find out that it's too harsh of a light, and then having to turn it down.
And then you have to redo that whole process.
And I have to redo that whole process. But that's obviously a very niche thing that is gearing it towards just my opinion as a dev.
Right.
So in terms of games, it's obviously it's going to look more realistic. So I think as far as lights go, I don't think I can explain it too easily outside of a dev view. But as far as reflections go, obviously you can see reflections in this scene.
Yes, right. You have like the reflection on the floor of the lit up banner, and so on.
Yeah. So obviously a big thing that they showed is, well, a lot of their scenes, especially in that little early demo, they didn't even show any refraction or anything, and then they turned RTX on, and suddenly the refraction, the cube that was originally like concrete or something, just turned into a glass sphere.
Okay.
I think because they were a bit confusing with that, but in general, like reflections is quite a massive graphical update because there's so many different systems that are going into faking reflections, and that sort of meme, sort of catchphrase of "it just works."
Yeah.
Obviously it doesn't just work because they put a lot of work into it, but as soon as it's available to developers and they know how it works and it actually gets implemented, it kind of does just work, because it is just an on-off thing.
So you have all of these tools here. Will it essentially consolidate a lot of the tools into a single tool at that point, or are you still going to
Yeah,
have to
so
use some of these old? Well, and then we'll get into that in a second because we currently have consoles that obviously don't support this. So as a game developer, I'm assuming this is something you would have to add on. It's more going to be an add on top instead
yeah.
of.
I mean, games have always scaled anyway, right? So if I want to make a game, say popular games at the moment, Fortnite, is on PC and it looks a lot better than it does on console. But as a developer, they're also making it on mobile, and so that whole scale of what they're creating it on has always been a thing, and it's I don't think it's too far of a stretch, especially in Unreal Engine when it does become a setting. I imagine it'll be over here in the world settings.
So it'll just you'll be able to turn it on globally, and then you're no longer adding points of light, or how does that work exactly? So,
For me as a developer, I do think it would be easy to, or fairly easy to implement in Unreal games because I still need the light to be there. But again, in situations like this, just moving to another room, we've got different problems. Again, lights that aren't being ray traced with objects that are dynamic, which means it can move. You can see that even in this demo, they are showing that the drawbacks of that are it doesn't have shadows. And obviously with RTX, and in the Tomb Raider demo, the children that were holding the lights didn't have shadows because.
Okay, so you would basically on the dynamic light, or the dynamic object, which would be the one that's moving or whatnot, you could essentially just plug in that single light point or light source right there, and then it would automatically render those shadows across those moving objects, as opposed to having to go in and, I guess, manually do it, right, or trick it into doing it.
It's more tricking. So there's different things. Obviously, I could maybe make a shadow look a little bit softer. I could maybe duplicate the light and then, maybe put the intensity to it. This is how maybe they fake global illumination at the moment. In a lot of cases, if it's not in a baked scene, then maybe you'd get a light and you'd put it on like really low intensity, and then that can look like that's just a way of faking obviously the additional light that would be cast from a dynamic light.
Okay. I see what you're saying. And then back on the reflections, the reflections are going to be the big deal here primarily. Okay. And that's because the light refracting off of the surfaces, not the source, but off of the surfaces. Is that why?
So refraction is a strange one. I'll quickly explain some of the ways that we fake reflections, and I'll show some of the drawbacks of that, because, I mean, at the moment, if I break the illusion of that scene and come outside, and I maybe get a sphere, you can see this doesn't look as good as it does when it's inside. That scene looks really nice, and if I try and take things outside, it's just not looking right. Because literally all of the other information around this object, as far as the scene goes, is locally faked sort of thing. So there's these little spheres here are locally taking an image, much like the point light from a single point. It's taking an image in a spherical shape.
Okay, and then pushing it out to the floor there, essentially.
And then it's basically just giving you these reflections. And I can open another scene here, but I'll hold off on that for a second. And so some of the ways that are, that shadow is just pure black, right? Because there's no other lights in the scene at the moment. But so one of the ways that it's faked is you on the same, whereas this little thing takes a picture of the entire room and it reflects it. And it looks pretty good, but the quality, if I do turn off the other additional reflections, the quality you'll see is quite pixelated. I can find the actual setting. There. So that's the kind of quality that this thing here is giving out. It's giving out that sort of blurry.
Yeah.
And it does allow me to see it while this actual sign isn't on the screen. So I can look down. Again, this is something that ray tracing is doing. So ray tracing would allow me to see this sign in the floor while I'm not looking at it. And obviously we're getting that at the moment, but the quality
is low.
Right. It's very low. And
yeah, so when it was funny, I've been playing Resident Evil 7, and so I watched the demo, and I watched the demo of the Battlefield demo where they were showing the flames in the car, right?
Yep.
And how, like, basically if it's not in the field of view, you can't see it. But then I was playing Resident Evil 7, and I noticed, like, I don't know if you ever played it, but there's the old woman, and she's hunting you with the torch or whatnot. And I was hiding in a corner, and I could see the light being refracted or, reflected off of the wall. But that's basically just being faked here at this moment, or at this moment with basically this. What's this tool called? I apologize.
This is a sphere reflection capture.
Sphere reflection capture. Okay.
Or just a spherical light probe or something like that.
But as opposed to having to put that into the game, right, it would just essentially be on the actual asset of that torch.
It'd be being done in real time because...
This real time, so real time would mean basically you wouldn't have to put that in there at all. You would just have to have the light source on that torch.
I just have to say that this surface here that we're looking at, I'd have to say that surface is this amount of roughness.
Okay.
And if it's towards the shiny side of roughness, then with ray tracing on, that's going to look exactly like a lot more realistic than it does with one of these sphere captures. I'll change scenes in a moment and show them a little bit better. But as you can see, if I do delete that,
right, everything goes away.
And that's kind of what they showed off in the demo. They were showing off a scene like this without any faking, because it kind of makes sense. It does show how drastic the difference is.
Right, but it's not really explaining the fact that we do kind of have these features already. And maybe that's what I didn't understand. I didn't understand, right, if I'm watching that and then I go to play my Resident Evil 7, I'm like, well, what's happening on the screen is exactly what they're showing ray tracing, quote unquote, does. So from the consumer's perspective, it's kind of like, why would I need it if it's already here? But the point of it is to basically streamline and give better tools for developers to create these assets, right?
Yeah, definitely. So at the moment, I'm actually running this off a GTX 760.
Okay.
So I'm quite a generation behind. But if you own a 1080 Ti, then I'd say, it's pretty good. And if you've had it for 2 years, then maybe you'd think about upgrading, or 1 year, how long it's been out, obviously.
Right.
But so for me, upgrading from a 760, I think that for me it's worth it. But the thing that they were showing in the Battlefield demo is screen-spaced reflections as well.
Okay.
And I'm just going to show that because there was another demo released recently that showed how it showed one of the drawbacks of that. So if I start turning this value up, you'll start to see that the reflections are actually a better quality than the sphere reflection capture.
Okay. Yes. Right.
So that's the resolution on that is a lot higher than the spherical reflection capture. However, as soon as this Unreal Engine 4 sign comes off the screen, then I can't see that anymore.
Yep, I see it. Yeah. Okay. But if you were in real life and you looked down, right, that reflection would still be there. The reflection doesn't disappear. So you
Yeah,
get a
exactly.
higher quality, but only if the asset is within the frame, right?
By looks of the ray tracing, it does have a really high quality. Um, but this is one of the things. But then where this kind of screen space reflections doesn't hold up so well
Uh-huh.
is, say, if I get playing at this angle and I put a shiny material on it,
Yeah.
this is actually probably, I don't know what it's going to look like, but I imagine, yeah. So in one of the latest demos, there's a mech that comes out of a out of like onto a spaceship or something like that.
Right.
And when they turned RTX off, the reflection of the mech did exactly this. It gets this kind of, because we can't see the information on the other side of this object,
Mm-hmm.
it's kind of stretching what we can see and filling in that space. Um, and yeah, I think you can agree that that doesn't hold up
Yeah.
too well.
So the benefits that we're getting are two things: more real time developing, and more accuracy in the final product. Is that, do I understand that correctly?
Yeah, so it is it's a massive graphical update for sure, and it's just truly amazing how they can how they can ray trace in real time in general. Um, it might be at a cost of frames. Obviously, we haven't seen benchmarking and we haven't seen that sort of stuff.
Right. We
But
have the rumor of the 1080p running at 30 FPS, and then so on and so forth.
yeah,
Um, but all technology like this has to kind of start somewhere, right? I think
yeah,
if we talk about Sony when they came out and said now we're doing real 3D environments, people were faking it so easily previously that, like, to the consumer it didn't really make much sense because it's still, the games didn't have a huge graphical update immediately,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Some of
Um,
the old 3D environments, yeah, for
yeah,
sure.
some of the old ones, like in, what was it, the first PlayStation. So when they went from, I think it was when they went from PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 2, correct me if I'm
Mhm.
wrong, that's when they went into like real true 3D environments.
Yeah, there was. I mean, it
Um,
was still. I think they were still using polygons a lot, but the method of rendering them was
Different
very
than,
different.
yeah, than what they were using before. So
Yeah.
that's super interesting. Do you know, have you looked into DLSS at all? So the deep learning super sampling.
I only know as much as what was in the presentation, pretty much. I've seen
Okay.
people talking about it.
That one seems a little bit more basic to understand. I mean, anti-aliasing is going to essentially just be removing the jaggies in a lot of situations. The charts seem a little weird to me because it was like comparing it with anti-aliasing on at 4K and then DLSS on at 4K, and so you saw like this huge performance hit, right,
Yeah,
with the AA on, and then afterwards with the DLSS on, you know, the performance
performance bump. Yeah,
increase. But what I didn't really understand was the AI portion of that. So, and to a full extent, right? Because as far as I can understand it so far, like, if the game hasn't been run through that engine multiple times, like, the driver's not going to be able to pick it up and actually get those performance increases, right? Because it would have to already have um, ran that process multiple times.
what you're saying is roughly the same as my understanding on that, because that is just, as far as I'm aware, that is something that Nvidia is doing specifically to increase performance in 4K, I suppose. So that's just something that you'd have to work at Nvidia pretty much, or on any of these games that are using um, the latest tech,
So if
AAA
we're
games.
separating, for example, right? So you had like Hairworks, and then you had HBAO Plus, right? Um,
Physics.
yeah, the PhysX or whatnot.
Mhm.
And when you were talking about those two features, like, I'm wondering how much DLSS is really relevant compared to the ray tracing.
I don't know. I think for me, from what I've seen, again, based on just what they've shown, it is, if it's allowing the scene to be rendered at a lower resolution, and then it makes it look just as good as a 4K resolution,
Right.
and you know, if you looked at those two images side to side, and you can't notice a difference, then technically you're getting more frames for an image that looks the same.
Or you're getting, well, okay. Yeah, okay. But it would have to show a visual fidelity increase and a visual fidelity increase for that to be.
Yeah.
I see here you're pulling up the metallic reflection. So this would be close to like what they were doing with the Star Wars demo.
Pretty much. But what you'll notice is if I turn the gameplay view on, they've actually got a sphere reflection capture per each one of these objects, which again is a performance hit. And you know, the more of these I use, the more images are stored. As I say, sorry about the super sampling. I don't know about that.
So the less of these that you are, so what you're saying here is that you have to use more tools to obtain these kind of reflections if you're trying to fake it.
That reflection looks pretty good.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. But the way that it's done is only if that object is around the reflection capture, which is on the inside. So if it's hard to see because.
Would you say that if you tried to do the same thing they're doing with Star Wars and you tried to fake it, that you would have to add so many assets that it would decrease performance?
Yes. There's a lot of scenes on the Unreal Engine marketplace. There's one called the Reflection scene. I think there's one done by a texturing software company that did a sci-fi room. And in general, if you see any of these in amazing scenes, if you see them with this view on, where you get to see everything, that all the lights, you get to see the icons, and you'll probably see a reflection capture in these tiny scenes. You'll see about 100 refraction captures, so that they do get those sort of quality reflections.
Okay.
And that is a performance hit because you want to use these sparingly or when needed.
Okay. But if you were able to just add in one single source through the ray tracing tools, theoretically, in comparison, if you tried to do this the old way and then tried to do it the new way, you would have a performance increase the new way, possibly? Or do we know yet?
You would. I think ray tracing is so expensive and so tricky to do that you wouldn't particularly get a. I can't say whether it'll be a performance increase or decrease, but to get the same quality, it would be a lot less work as far as the technology's already reached that point.
Yeah, that makes sense. Gotcha. Cool, man. I think I understand a little bit more. So specifically the tools that they're going to remove is going to be, well, not remove, because, so from a developer's perspective, tell me this, you're going to still have to do a majority of this work for the current systems, current consoles and all of that. So it's not going to reduce the amount of work you do.
It's not particularly going to increase it.
But
it's not going to reduce it.
Or increase it.
Because if I look at these settings right here, Unreal have made it, Epic Games have made it really easy for people using their engine. Obviously,
okay, so like you come in here and like, let's say, so one of these would technically be a quality option, right? Like it would be in game, you would just basically set it up to where like you just say, okay, now at this point turn off all the other stuff and then turn on ray tracing.
Yeah, so I imagine that in the next update of Unreal, or whenever they make this sort of stuff available to developers, it will literally be, a new shader, or it'll be, however they want to divide it up. I don't know how they're going to do it, but you can see stuff here. I can change the shader models for like mobile, so I can preview it.
Okay.
And I imagine because the technology is already done with ray tracing, it obviously up to that point it doesn't just work, but when they actually put this in the scene, it kind of does just work. That that's I don't see a problem with that catchphrase.
Okay. So you're saying basically like it should be easy enough to implement that adding it on as a developer on top of it shouldn't increase the amount of development time astronomically. So it's possible that game devs will just kind of turn it on.
Definitely within Unreal Engine,
Okay.
but third-party engines or
Will be more difficult.
that they I've never used one. I mean, I have used one, but it was an underdeveloped. It was still heavily in development, so this feature was obviously nowhere near it. And
What
in
about
general,
like Unity? Is Unity getting support for it, or do we know?
I guess we don't know, but I can imagine they're going to want to stay ahead of that as well, and maybe try and implement that kind of stuff as
Implement
well.
it.
Yeah.
Do you know, like, so currently for the titles, like, what engine is like Shadow of the Tomb Raider on, and Battlefield 5's on Frostbite, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I mean, any once it's been implemented to one game, um, they do tend to reuse that engine. I imagine Frostbite engine doesn't look too different to to Unreal Engine. It's just probably less user friendly. Maybe you don't get all these icons saying whatever. But at the end of the day, it's the same techniques being used. And once this thing gets implemented, if they do implement it the same way that Unreal does into other engines, then it's just something that developers can turn on and off, just like they showed in the demos.
Okay, and so at that point, then it's feasible that we get more titles with that just support it out of the box, right? Because it's easy enough to implement.
Um, it's something that I think we would see definitely. And there's so many games coming out in Unreal Engine that I don't think between the big titles that do choose to implement it, I don't think you would be struggling to find games that do include it.
Okay, gotcha. Tiger Fangs, I definitely would recommend you rewatching this video from the beginning to get a better understanding of what Andrew's explaining here, because it's definitely something that will make things easier on developers. Now, as far as his implementation for the end consumer, that's what I was trying to get at with him right now, because the what I assume the biggest opponent of this technology is that it's only on NVIDIA GPUs, and that if it costs more development time, then studios would kind of say, well, what's the point? We're going to sell more on Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and the base PC platform. And
Yep.
then at that point, I think they start weighing the cost to I guess performance or whatever at that point.
I think, I mean, games at the moment, like, I think you've generally got they've got when when they are games shown, if it's a game on every platform, such as Tomb Raider,
Right.
they're going to be showing it off with RTX in their advertising because it looks the best with with RTX. If and then they still have the right to say that this is real time.
Now, what do you think about this being kind of so early on and releasing the TI version right along with everything else? Do you think that they have like a RTX version like being worked on for 7 nanometer that's going to launch within like a year? I found it really interesting that they just dropped the 1080 Ti immediately, or the 2080 Ti immediately.
Yeah, I haven't kept a close eye on other releases over the past, from the 900 series to the 1080s and such.
Typically, it's
I'm
like they'll do the 20 or the 1080, 1070, for example, and then like 6 months to a year later, they did the 1080 Ti, right?
Mhm. I
Um,
think
and I know we're really close to 7 nanometer, so I was
I
just
think
wondering if that's kind of an idea.
I think they certainly want to be spreading things out, and if they had released the 1080 Ti at the same time as the 1080, then that would have been 2.5 years without another release in that area.
Right.
Is that correct?
Yeah, so that's why I was wondering if they're going to, because we're supposed to, TSMC is supposed to hit that next year, 7 nanometer, and then I think AMD has it uh, on their kind of
Yeah, and I think I agree with
map.
some other YouTubers. They sort of said that. I mean, I don't. We haven't seen how well these cars perform, so you can't really compare them to anything at the moment. But you can compare the prices, and if you
Right.
compare the prices, then the 2080 Ti is closer to a Titan XP.
Correct. Yeah.
Um,
So
so
D-Man was saying you still have to develop for RTX and non-RTX for the same game, right? So people without RTX GPUs can play. And the answer to that, the short answer to that, D-Man, is yes. And the second answer to that, and that's what we were having Andrew on here for, was to get an idea of how difficult it is to implement. So if you guys didn't watch my video about the games that support it earlier. You can check it out later. But I was saying, as a consumer, it's the same thing of when I look at buying a console. Like, how many exclusives are on that console? Is it worth my time to buy that console? You know, because is there enough games on it to actually justify that purchase? And so that's kind of the argument with RTX. But I think I think Andrew here has kind of alleviated some of that by explaining that basically it's a just turn it on and it works type deal. And if you're using something like Unreal 4, the developers are basically just going to be able to add that as an option into game, and then it'll wipe away all of the old trickery features that are currently being used and just add in that feature instead, and the light sources won't have to be individually modified like they have to be now. Do I understand that correctly?
yeah, pretty much.
So if the light source is there, right? So you have these light sources, correct?
Yeah.
And as opposed to being, you would just click on RTX instead, and those light sources would basically just take over the
So
job of casting all of the shadows and reflections, so then you don't have to go add in all the rest of the stuff anymore.
yeah, so all of the other, so we'd mainly be talking about just real time rendering, obviously.
Right.
Um, as far as because you can still bake lights statically. If you turned RTX on, you would start getting soft shadows, just like shown in the demos,
Okay.
which is not possible.
Right. So
Um,
there's some things that are not possible, but as far as like from a dev's perspective, you don't consider it to be something that would be super difficult to turn on. So it's a possibility that it just gets turned on in a lot of
yeah,
games.
once it's been implemented into the engine, it's something that I imagine is just like anything else in Unreal. You can turn it on and off.
Okay.
And that's exactly, obviously the demos that we saw weren't Unreal Engine, say Battlefield, Tomb Raider, and clearly they have the option in game to turn it on and off. So they obviously have that option while developing as well.
Right. And Sam in chat brings up a good point. He wonders if ray tracing would make their way into next gen consoles, and he did do an LOL, and then it would become the norm in general gaming development. But so a couple things there, Sam. That was my concern, right? And then that's why I wanted to have this chat with Andrew here, is kind of to get an idea of if it's feasible to start adding the dev budget into just turning RTX on or not. And I think I'm getting the answer of like, yes, it's easy enough that to turn on once it's added into engines like Unreal, that it wouldn't be that difficult.
Because I'm not a programmer, so I can't speak to how things are implemented.
Okay, yeah,
But certainly, again, everything in Unreal, it's they make it pretty much like playing a game itself because it is literally as easy as just going into some of the settings and hitting a button in some cases, and you get some effects that people have already developed.
right, okay, gotcha. But it's easier to implement than previous techniques.
previous techniques, yeah, they require work to get right, definitely.
Okay.
Again, as I mentioned earlier, there's a reflection capture in each one of these spheres, just to get the reflection looking good. Whereas if it was ray traced, this entire screen would be ray traced, and all of the reflections
would already be there, sort of.
And they would be reflecting from the surface as well, not just a fake point with inside the object.
Okay.
You'd be getting physically correct reflections.
So does that have anything to do with the difference between like mesh detail and then like surface detail? So it would be able to do it off of the asset instead of through the actual. Because right now I assume you have like a. What would it call it? I don't know the terms. That's why I have you on. But right now, you basically all of those reflections are coming from an asset that's inside of essentially that object, right?
A sphere it's a reflection capture that takes an image, and then it projects that back onto the object.
Okay, gotcha.
So it's just completely fake. The reflections are not real, and that's why you can't see your character's reflections. If you're playing a game and you want to walk next to something, unless they're using screen space, then you can't see your character's reflections.
Then you can't see it if you. Yeah. Okay. So.
And if you could. Yeah. Sorry,
I think we've covered everything. Is there anything else you wanted to cover?
No. If there's no more questions.
We'll have a couple questions here to wrap up with. So if you guys are just tuning in now, I definitely recommend going back. Some of the things that. So the screen space reflections, and then you had the point for the reflections as well. So there's a mix of those two being used to make sure that the reflection is shown when the asset's off screen, right? But the cost to that is that the quality is lower than if you use screen space reflection, correct?
And you get sort of artifacts like this.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Gotcha. So Sam did say, do you think that AMD or Intel with the new GPU could also develop efficient enough hardware to dedicate to ray tracing aside the RTX brand?
I guess that's more of a question for you, isn't it?
Yeah, so that's going to be up to... So as far as AMD and their roadmap goes right now, they've mentioned nothing about ray tracing, period. They are racing to the 7 nanometer FinFET at this time. So what they're trying to do is basically get to 7 nanometer as fast as possible. From the way I understand all of their press conferences and such. So can AMD do it? Yes. In the next 2 years, I don't see them doing it. I think that they're probably going to have to basically do some reverse engineering on what NVIDIA's implemented here. Not that they can't, because obviously that's how this industry works. Somebody innovates something like this, whether it's NVIDIA, Intel, AMD, and then everybody else basically reverse engineers it and comes out with their own form of it. I mean, that's how AMD became a company in the very first place. So it's nothing out of the norm for the industry as far as I'm concerned. So I think AMD can do it. Do I think they're going to be able to do it, on Navi? No, because I haven't seen them mention anything about it. But that's about it. Jibber says, thanks for coming, Andrew. And we're going to wrap this up. Make sure you guys go check out his YouTube channel in the description below. Lots of cool projects over there. What would I call it? ASMR stuff for developing. But go check it out. Check him out on Twitter at Andrew Weir Art. It should be in the title. And that's going to close it up. I don't have any more closing thoughts unless you do, and unless we have any more questions.
No, it's great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. We'll see you guys next Tuesday.